Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Seth Joyner Show. We got a great one today. There is so much going on surrounding our Philadelphia Eagles. It's always been my intent to try to figure out how to bring you guys the best content. We're not only talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, but we're talking about what's going on around the entire NFL. But this show today will be exclusively about the bombshell article that was released yesterday on The Athletic. And in like fashion, I told you guys I'm going to bring you the best content. I got the three gentlemen that put this all together yesterday. So I'm going to introduce them. I'm going to bring each one of these guys in, and we're going to go through as much of this controversy as we probably can go through, because I was shocked as much as I think you guys were shocked by what was written in this article, and it leaves us wondering where the organization is and whether they can right this ship at this time. I'm shocked. That's the only adjective I have, after reading this article. So let me bring in, first of all three of these gentlemen write for The Athletic. I'm going to bring in Zach Berman. If you're in Philadelphia, you guys know this guy. Zach, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm awesome, man. I'm going to bring in Sheil Kapadia. You guys know him. I believe, Sheil, you're writing for the Titans now, correct?
No, I'm just doing national coverage
Okay.
and also Eagles for the NFL. So I'm still Philly based here. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. And I'm going to bring in this gentleman, Bo Wolf. Pleasure to meet you. I've never had that pleasure before. But, gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have you on the Seth Joyner Show today. Let's get started. I guess, if you want to talk about what's transpiring with the Philadelphia Eagles, it starts and begins in any organization, whether you're talking about a football team or whether you're talking about a business, it all starts at the top. And there's a lot to get through when you're talking about one Jeffrey Lurie, because I had, 2 weeks ago, I had Joe DeCamera on, and we talked, and Joe posed a question, gentlemen, that kind of struck me oddly. He said, because when Doug was fired, I felt the media in Philadelphia did an outstanding job of just peppering Jeffrey with questions. If you're going to fire Doug, why not Howie? And Joe said to me, he's like, hey, maybe Jeffrey knows that Howie isn't the one that's accountable for what happened in this situation. Maybe it's Jeffrey himself that has done what he's done, because he evaded it at every turn. And that kind of caught me off guard. But then I read you guys' article, and all of a sudden it all makes sense. So, Zach, is Jeffrey too involved as the owner of this football team? Has he turned into the Jerry Jones of the Philadelphia Eagles?
I think it's probably an overstatement to say he's Jerry Jones. He's not picking their backup right guard, right? Like he's not making every decision, but it's naive to think that he's not making decisions at all. He's involved. He's more involved than the public perception would indicate, and he's more involved than he was a few years ago. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean Jeffrey Lurie's a bad owner. A matter of fact, if you just look at, his 3 decades or going on to 3 decades here owning the team, it's by far been the most successful period in Eagles history. And I think relative to other teams in the league, they're very successful, or I should say relatively successful. That being said, they've had an alarming number of misses in the draft and in free agency in recent years. And Jeffrey Lurie's imprints are not just on some of these decisions, but I think from a broader view, the strategy and the philosophy that goes into the process of making those decisions.
Well, listen, we're going to dig a little deeper into all of that, because my goodness, you guys, that article, not only was it very informative, but it was a long article. There was a lot of stuff to decipher in there. And Bo, listen, I'm not insinuating in any way that Jeffrey Lurie is a bad owner. I believe that his intentions for the Philadelphia Eagles, the fans of Philadelphia, that organization, are in the right place. I don't think that you spend $185 million for an organization and not have that intent. But when you hear some of the things that you heard, it's just beyond me. It's beyond comprehension to believe that you would spend that kind of money and you can do whatever you want to do. But as a business person, he understands that as the owner of the business, you got to put good people in position to do the job. And to me, from what I'm deciphering from this, he's kind of overstepped those boundaries in some areas. And that's just not healthy for any organization.
And it's funny because sort of everybody we talked to who would tell us that, yes, it's true, Jeffrey has become a little bit more involved, like, these Tuesday meetings that he had with Doug Peterson, he didn't have those with Andy Reid. He's a little bit more involved in the draft than he was in years past. But the people who would tell us all these things would at the same time be like, but Jeffrey's great. Like, we love Jeffrey. He wants to win. He spends money. Like, this is all stuff. And, if you put yourself in his shoes, like if you're the owner of a team, of course you would want to be involved in the process. Like, it's like, this is what you own the team for. But I think what the problem is that there is nobody there to tell Jeffrey no, or to say that, maybe we shouldn't take your word for it on this one. Like, there's nobody that Jeffrey trusts to make those decisions without his input. And I think, one of the things we've learned about Howie Roseman is that he's good at managing up, so to speak. And so if he invites Jeffrey Lurie's input as a way of making himself more valuable, then there's nobody to stop that from being the case.
Sheil, I want you to talk about Jeffrey for a second and your take, but it's hard to talk about one without talking about the other.
Yeah.
Because as you've, according to your article and according to what I've always thought and what I believe, I don't believe that decisions are being made in this collaborative way that they want everyone to believe. And there's a lot that goes into that. But give me your perception of Jeffrey Lurie as an owner. Like I said, I do believe that he's a good owner and he's doing what, he feels is best for the organization. But sometimes, you can be, in the midst of the forest and you can't see the trees. Could that be the situation with Jeffrey Lurie at this point in time?
My take is Jeffrey Lurie's most important job is that right-hand man. Who is the person in the organization he trusts to put it all together? Scouting, personnel, coaching, analytics, all the different voices that are in an organization. There's got to be one person who takes all that information and says, okay, thank you. Here's the decision we're making. Is transparent about it. It's got to be somebody everyone trusts. It's got to be someone with great leadership skills. Now, listen, when Andy Reid was there, Jeffrey Lurie still liked having input on the draft, right? This didn't just happen like, 3 years ago, he thought the draft was fun all of a sudden. Like when he bought the team, he's saying, this is fun. I'm a big sports fan. Let me tell you guys what I think about some of these prospects. I want to watch tape. But guess what? At that time, there were people in place, and whether it was Andy Reid or Joe Banner or whoever was there could say, Jeffrey, thank you. We appreciate your opinion. Let me explain to you why we're going to go in a different direction. And that's how it should work, right? That's how the process should work. Now, how you have it now, I don't think Howie Roseman is doing that to a large degree. Now, whether it's that Jeffrey Lurie doesn't trust Howie Roseman or trust his head coach as much as he did during that 14-year run with Andy Reid, that could be the case. But I don't think Jeffrey Lurie doesn't go in there berating Doug Peterson. Jeffrey Lurie doesn't go in there in the draft room putting his foot down and saying, this is who we're picking. He's not a confrontational guy, Seth. I'm sure you in your interactions with him, he's kind of like an easygoing, gets along with people type of guy. And so I think he is just so important. I mean, it's the biggest decision, the only decision that really matters matters with Jeffrey Lurie is who's that person by his side who he trusts. Because if he nails that hire, if that's a person who builds a culture where everyone's saying, all right, we're all pulling in the same direction. Yes, the owner has a say, but the owner isn't the only one that has a say, then you're fine. If that's not the case, then you have what we've seen over the last 5 years.
Hey, listen, by no stretch of the imagination am I trying to let Howie Roseman off the hook, okay? But this whole Jeffrey thing, you have to look at it with a fine-tooth comb. I would love to have been a fly, on you guys' microphone as you gathered this information, because I'm looking at, what you wrote, pre-purchase of the Philadelphia Eagles. Jeffrey Lurie is a guy that saw himself as, an NFL super fan, a draftaholic. He was breaking down film and grading players and all this kind of stuff. I mean, how dangerous is that? Because when you look at the draft and you listen to some of the chatter that has gone on, the Eagles have kind of strayed away from traditional evaluations and traditional mock drafts, ever since Andy Reid has been gone. You take J-Jaw, you take Jalen Reagor when, everything says that Justin Jefferson is the guy. You take Jalen Hurts with the 53rd pick, right after you sign your quarterback to a franchise, deal. And you take Davion Taylor, a guy who was, very, very gifted athlete, but a guy who, for all intents and purposes, is a project at third. And, in the third round, how dangerous, is it to have an owner, because I don't believe for 1 second, that I think that Howie kind of made some missteps along the way, and Jeffrey made the decision to step in a much greater way than he ever had before because he felt he needed to. If he was going to keep Howie, then this is what he needed to do. He needed to take a more proactive role. How dangerous, all three of you guys, how dangerous is this, to the long-term prognostication of this organization?
Well, the thing I would jump in and say is like I'm not necessarily sure the scouts would have made the best picks either, right? If, in our reporting we said that they were considering J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and Paris Campbell in the second round in 2019, and I would say neither one of those wide receivers have turned out to be good pick. I think the focus should be more on the process, right? And I think that's where I would say needs the most work in the organization is that whether it's the scouts, whether it's the coaches, whether it's the people in the analytics department, whether it's ownership, they need to be. You're not going to have unanimous rankings, but they need to have some transparency in how these picks are made, and then try to figure out is there a player or can they assemble a board that at least is understood. This is how picks are made. So when they look at it after the fact and they're debriefing, if you will, there's not ambiguity in that process. So I think the process is more of the issue when you look at the organization.
Sure. And I think the lack of transparency plays into all of this stuff, because when there is no transparency and the board, looks one way and the pick is made a different way, then everybody else in the building, all they can do is sort of speculate about why those decisions were made, because there is not that communication from the top. So when, Reagor gets taken over Justin Jefferson, or when Davion Taylor gets drafted, despite, some scouts or coaches not thinking necessarily that he would have been that highly ranked, then all of a sudden people are like, oh, well, it must be, Jeffrey making that decision, or it must be Jeffrey listening to analytics, when we don't know if that's the case. It could have just been a Howie pick. But the way that things are set up is almost like there's no choice but to sort of finger point afterwards, because there isn't that sort of collaborative process where everybody's there. This is our board. We're going to stick to our board, or if not, we're going to tell everybody why it is. And then there's a little bit more, cohesion. Everybody's rooting for the same guy, as opposed to looking at a pick and being like, that's not the pick that I thought we were going to make.
Sure. Before you go, listen, I think that this sort of thing happens in every organization. I mean, you've got multiple scouts, you got football operations people, you've got, coaches on the staff. If we're looking wide receiver and I'm the wide receiver coach, I got a guy that I've been looking at for the last 3 years in my mind that I'm saying that guy fits what we do, and I have the wherewithal to get him to realize his potential and his talent. And that's the guy that I want. Okay. The scouts may be looking at it different. The GM may look at it different. The football operations people may look at it different. So you're going to have that, but you talk about the transparency, the collaborative piece of it is, okay, let's weigh the pros and cons, and let's get to a point where we can narrow it down to the top 2 guys. And then let's look at all the intangibles and pick the right guy that everyone believes, is best for the position, and let's live with it, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Sorry to cut you off, Shield. Go ahead.
No, I think you make a great point. I mean, people don't know, right? And that's the issue. And so they're sitting there. And last year, we heard stories because of the pandemic where everyone's not together, that they're watching at home going, wait a minute, we did what? People this isn't me as a fan at home. I know I was doing that when they picked Jalen Hurts, but we're talking about people within the organization. And I think the JJ Arcega-Whiteside pick is such a great example that speaks to the bad process that Zach was talking about, right? And it's not because they picked the wrong player. We can go through every team and say, hey, they picked the wrong guy. They should have gone with this guy. That happens. You're going to have hits. You're going to have misses. The issue there is that they're on the clock. Their pick is up in the second round of the NFL draft, and they've narrowed it down to 2 wide receivers, and they're having a discussion while on the clock. They're literally having a vote in the draft room about which one of these 2 players we should pick. I mean, come on, that is a bad process. That should have already been decided. You stack your wide receivers. We're not even talking about if it's different positions. Maybe that's one thing, right? Maybe you're saying, all right, we got 2 guys in the same tier. Do we want to go with the wide receiver? Do we want to go with the defensive end? These were 2 wide receivers they're looking at. Why, when there's 10 minutes on the clock and you've got to get your pick in, are you calling on people in the draft room to vote then? Why do you not have a draft board in place where you say this is a smooth process? We've put weeks, months, scouting, meetings, opinions from everywhere. We've got it together, and now we just make our pick. And so that, to me, really speaks to one of the issues. And that, people in the building will look at it and say, oh, that was a scouting pick. Oh, that was a coaching pick. Oh, that was a Lurie pick. Oh, that was an analytics pick. Like that's not how it should work. There's got to be one person putting that all together and saying, I know everyone's not going to agree with it. Like you mentioned, Seth, there's always friction, coaches in front office. Everyone's not going to agree with it. Here's why we did it. The guy's in our building. Let's put our full support behind him. There's too much politics, and it hasn't been a strong culture to do that thus far.
It's funny that you mentioned that because, in Jeffrey's, presser, the day that he fired Doug, he talked about, the misses in the draft and how, you've got your eye on a guy and someone before you grabs him. And then all of a sudden,
what kind of excuse was that? Yeah.
I was blown away by that too. I'm like, if you got a board, don't you have guys like, okay, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And when they go off the board, you just pull them off your board and you just go down to the next guy.
Right.
That made no sense to me whatsoever. That they would be in that position. That creates chaos instead of a smooth transition. And to make matters worse, the most embarrassing thing to me was, and I know you guys have seen it, when we picked Jalen Reagor last year and they showed the Minnesota Viking war room, they erupted in laughter. And it was like, put the pick in now. I was like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Your process is now a laughingstock around the NFL. Everyone got to see that you made one of the biggest mistakes and even compounded by his performance last year.
Well, now, Seth, don't get Shield started on Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson.
Don't check my receipts on that one, Seth. Yeah, let's move on to the next topic there.
Okay.
Although, Seth, to that point though, you were mentioning a moment ago about listening to your coaches and listening to the scheme and look, with some of these draft misses, there are a lot of different theories, and no one really raises their hand and say that was me on a pick, right? But one theory you hear is that the coaching staff was more in favor of Rager than Jefferson because of the perception that Jefferson was a slot only type and the way they would fit the offense. And there have been decisions in the past based more on how a player fits. And so I think that can be problematic too. And that's why
because
I really
the coaching
echo,
staff is gone 1 year later.
Exactly. So that's why I echo what Shield said is that I think the issue here is that like there's this idea that the coaches want this player, the scouts want this player, the analytics people want this player, maybe Jeffrey Lurie wants that player, and you need to get to a point where even if people don't like it, they look at the board and they say, okay, this is who the Eagles are taking because we've spent weeks or months in these meetings having these discussions, and we've heard from all these parties, and then this is how the Eagles make their board, and so there's less chaos in the moment. Hey, and I think that's a problem.
Listen, I'm going to, in light of what I now know, okay, I'm going to apologize to Doug Peterson right now because it must have been hell for that guy to have to coach this team for the last 5 years. If there's an iota of any of this being true, okay, so because you talk about the coaching staff wanted this pick, no. Wait a minute. Okay, Doug has had to step in front of that mic and take bullets for the last 5 years. Okay, so what is he gonna do? He's gonna step up to the mic and take the bullet. And the whole point about Justin Jefferson was a slot guy. Now you're telling on yourself as an organization because if you do your homework, and I don't get paid to scout, I don't get paid to know these things, but I research it. Because when I'm looking at the Eagles are in the market for a wide receiver. And I'm trying to figure, okay, which one of these guys are going to fall to us? Okay, so now I'm starting to look at their skill sets and what they bring to the table. I know that Justin Jefferson came into LSU as a slot receiver. He played the outside position, not a slot receiver, but an outside guy.
Yeah, I'm following you.
So his freshman year, he played outside, not much production. His second year, okay, he played outside. And that's when Joe Burrow got there, okay? He had something like 50-something receptions, maybe 7 or 8 touchdowns, 400, 500 yards receiving, okay? They go into his junior year. The coaching staff comes to him and says, hey, we're loaded. We need you to play the slot position. They move him to the slot position, and he blows up 111, receptions, almost 1,600 yards receiving, something crazy like 20-something touchdowns, okay? So now you have a guy that's multifaceted if you've done your homework and he can play outside, he can play inside. So that BS that you've given me about, he's only a slot guy, that just tells me that you and your scouts and your staff, your draft staff, you didn't do your homework if you're saying that. If that's your excuse, we're going to take Jalen Rager because, he's more of an outside guy. And now this year, this coaching staff has just said they're going to move him to the slot, okay? You just continue to make yourself look silly, year after year with these statements that most people won't look at, won't read between the lines and see exactly what's going on and just buy it. And he's a kick returner, he's a punt returner. Listen, if I draft a guy 21st overall, trust me, his ass ain't returning no kick.
Seriously.
Because
I'm tired of hearing that about Jalen Waddle. Like, who cares?
He's supposed to be your number one wide receiver if you pick him there. You can ill afford to have him get hurt returning a darn punt in a game, and now he can't play. That makes no sense to me.
Right. Maybe
don't tell me he returns punts, then actually use them.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe if there's 12 seconds left in a tie game against the Giants or something like that, but only then.
Good point. Okay. Listen, you guys watching the Seth Joyner Show. My guests today, Zach Berman, Bo Wolf, and Shield Kapadia. All writers for The Athletic. And, did they set off a firestorm. Let's segue over to one Howie Roseman. We dealt with Jeffrey. Let's deal with Howie. I don't even know where to start, to be honest with you. I mean, I got notes here. I guess I want to start with a quote that you guys have in the article that says that Howie has final say on the roster, the draft picks, the trades, and all signings.
Yes.
I would venture to say that he has that carte blanche through Jeffrey, and in coordination with Jeffrey as far as what they're going to do. Again, I don't want to let Howie off the hook. I know you guys saw Trey Burton's comments yesterday, and I was like, wow.
I didn't see them.
I guess you didn't see it?
No,
I didn't see it either. What he said? What did he say?
So Trey Burton said, unlike, the Chicago Bears or, the Indianapolis Colts, Howie Roseman has total control over everything. There's nothing that moves in that organization unless. And when I saw it, I tweeted. I was like, well, I guess Trey Burton won't ever be signed. I was like, goodness gracious. I mean, how timely to validate, those thoughts. And then
you must have read the story.
And then to turn around, and add fuel to that. I remember Nick Sirianni saying that Howie Roseman is going to have control over game day activations and deactivations. And I just held my head. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Don't the coaches know who's hurt and who's not hurt and what players they need? If they're short, if they got two offensive linemen that are injured, that they need to bring it. Why is Howie making all of those decisions?
Well, we had an anecdote in there which credits to Zach kind of unearthed that there was a member of the coaching staff who told Zach that I'm getting input from Howie on which young guys to play, and then I'm getting input from a senior member of the coaching staff on who to play. I mean, you're a position coach or another coach on the staff, and you're getting two pieces of conflicting information, and now you've got to make a decision. Not only that, but you've got your own opinions. I mean, you're with the guys all week. You have your own opinions on who should play, and so I do think it speaks to it does certainly speak to the process. And yes, Howie Roseman does have final say on the 46-man roster. And Seth, I think it's a key to point out that Howie's role is not like a lot of other GMs. You look at them, their job is to pick players, right? It's scouting personnel. His job is different. And so my big takeaway really from doing all this reporting and this article is the lack of collaboration. A lot of that's got to fall on Howie Roseman. If Doug Peterson is leaving those meetings with Jeffrey Lurie and he's feeling deflated and second guessed, there's got to be an intermediary there to say, hey, Doug, we weren't meaning to second guess you. Hope you're good. Great win. It's all good. If there are people on the scouting staff who say, why did Jeffrey Lurie just make that pick? What's going on? Why is the analytics staff telling me what to do? There's got to be an intermediary there that says, hey, listen, whoever it is on the scouting staff personnel, analytics is here to help us. They're not here to get in the way. Don't take offense to that. We're just having discussions, Jeffrey. So all these things, have to be smoothed over by somebody in the organization. And I do think that's Howie Roseman's role. And I think that was a big takeaway. When you look at all these different departments not working together, that's got to fall on somebody to build that culture. And I do think, he's got to bear a lot of responsibility for that.
Bo, I'm listening to all of this and I'm taken back to, when Chip Kelly got fired and Jeffrey's presser. I love press conferences because if you know what to look for and what to listen for, there's so many nuggets when you read in between the lines of what people say. Now I go back to that press conference because his number one thing was emotional intelligence and accountability. Okay. Now, I get the emotional intelligence. They got that out of Doug, even though I didn't see it, when they first hired him. They got it out of him because the players loved him. But the accountability piece, when we start talking about all these moving parts and how there's no transparency and there's no collaboration and there's none of these things, where's the accountability? I would even go so far, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because I do want to touch on Doug and how he was dealt with, down the road here. But where's the accountability? How do you fire a coach when you're making all the moves behind the scene? How do you put the onus on Doug Peterson, When you're making the draft picks and you're telling them who to coach and who to play and who to activate and who to deactivate, okay? And then the owner steps up in front of the mic and says, oh, it's a collaborative effort. It's not one guy's fault. Well, somebody's got to be the accountability person.
Yeah, I mean, and as Shield said, all of these picks, all of these signings, they're all on Howie Roseman's record. He is the guy who is making the final decision. So he is the one who should be accountable. And it's fair, to look at what happened this year and say, okay, the team went 4-11-1 in the worst division in football in modern NFL history. You got rid of the coach. You got rid of the quarterback. Why is the guy who hired the coach and drafted the quarterback still here? I think that's fair. And if you ask Jeffrey Lurie that question, as he was asked in that press conference, and he sort of scoffed at it a little bit, he says that he's got the receipts sort of, and he knows the decisions that Howie Roseman has made. So you have to sort of trust him there. And it's hard to believe that is necessarily the case, that there is not some other relationship going on in terms of maybe Jeffrey just wants to work with the guy he trusts. Obviously, he trusts Howie Roseman. He's always had a right-hand man. It was Joe Banner before it was Howie Roseman, and that's sort of how it's always been. And until there is somebody in the building who Jeffrey trusts more or equally close, I think it's going to be probably Howie Roseman's show.
Zach, I want to stay here on this accountability piece just because I'm going to interject the analytics side of it into this question for you, because I kind of feel like, listen, I'm not someone who will poo-poo analytics. The thing that I don't like about analytics is just the fact that, it's making coaching decisions and it's not allowing coaches, to coach from their gut, even though it seems to me that Doug Peterson was doing some of that and getting reprimanded for it every Tuesday afternoon. Analytics was a part of the game when I played. I used it when I played. I created my own analytics because the printout that they handed out every week, they never really taught us how to read the darn thing, other than, if they line up in split backs, how many times they run. But through film, I was able to create my own analytics. So in my own mind, you came out in third down on this part of the field, third down and 3, you came out in a certain formation. I could scroll in my memory and, okay, this is what they like to do. So I was prepared. So I get it. It's an integral part. The problem with analytics, the way it's being implemented and used today for me is that the analytics, according to, the accountability part of it, is making decisions. And when things don't work out, no one's held accountable for the fact that it didn't work out. So who's accountable? Is it the analytics guy? Is it the numbers? Because the number says that, on the plus side of the 50-yard line, your percentage of winning the game goes up, 10%, if you convert the fourth down, who's responsible, for that? Because in every situation where there's a success or where there's a failure, accountability must be there. And not only organizationally do you not have the accountability, but from the coaching staff, there's no accountability, because if the analytics are making the decision, then whose fault is it? How do you hold someone accountable for a misstep when the numbers said to do this?
Well, the first thing I would say is we need to demystify the analytics component of it. I don't think it's productive to say analytics or people in analytics are making this decision or that decision. I think what they need to do is figure out a way that those departments can mesh and work well together, and that there's not a rift or that there's not animosity. Because really, if you're a coach, if you're an evaluator, if you're a scout, if you're a player, well, I would defer to you on the player part of it, Seth. But I would imagine you would want as much information as you can, or as much productive information as you can. But the key with it is how are you using it? How is it being funneled? Who is funneling it? What's the relationship there? Maybe if your head coach needs to understand it a certain way, then that needs to be presented to him a certain way, right? So I think that we need to demystify it from the perspective of not making it like analytics versus football. That's the problem, frankly. But what they need to do is they need to find a way that they can work together, and they're not just saying they have this great analytics department and they're using data to inform their decisions, but they need to work on the human element as part of it.
Sheil, I think that, I think that Doug kind of stepped in it a little bit. And Zach, I may disagree with you a little bit because, Doug, came out and said, hey, I talked to my analytics guy. He's in my ear, during the whole situation. And, this is, the decision that we came to and this decision that we made, and it just didn't work out. Well, what the hell is the analytics guy doing, in the coach's ear? Why don't you just, if you got a book and you got the paper and you got the analytics that tells you the probabilities and the percentages and whatnot, why doesn't the head coach just have that on his play sheet of 10,000 plays where he can look at it and make the decision for himself? So I think that the analytics play into it. And listen, it's within your article, you guys talk about Jeffrey Lurie being this huge analytics guy.
Sure, absolutely.
He's with, the state-of-the-art analytics, department that he put together. And, Alec Hallaby and how he brought in Warren Sharp and all these things. Well, you're not spending that money just because, even the disconnect between, the analytics group and the scouts and the coaches, and things that they have done to create those rips, so they're not using the information, to make a collaborative decision. It seems to me that the analytics people think that they know exactly what they're doing and the coaches don't have a clue, and that the organization has given the analytics people free reign to do what they want to do. When the coach is the guy that's got to stand on the sideline and make snap decisions.
Yeah, I don't think I hear what you're saying. I think there's a perception in the building that certain, decisions are analytics decisions and that they do have an oversized influence specifically on Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman. With Doug Peterson and those in-game decisions, he does have a member of his coaching staff just because it's easier to say, hey, it's 4th and 3 at their 48, so he doesn't have to scroll through his paper. Is this a go? Do the numbers say this is a go? Do they say it's a punt? Do they say it's a field goal? And that's not uncommon. I did a story on the Baltimore Ravens last year. John Harbaugh is doing that with the coach there, and he's getting praised for it. So I don't have an issue with that. I think what Zach said is really the key point here, and that's that it's all about relationships. Seth, let's say you're the head coach and I'm the analytics guy, and you're like, I can't stand this guy. He's annoying. He bothers me all the time. I come in and I say, hey, Seth, why didn't we go for it on 4th down? You slam the door in my face and say, get out. I don't want to hear from you. Let's say we have a good relationship and we work together, and you say, I like this guy. I know he's in my corner. He can help me. He gave me some good information last week and we went for it on a 4th down. That helped me win the game. I might not always agree with what he says, but there's a mutual respect here and I understand what he's doing. Well, now when I come in and I say, hey, Seth, you punted on 4th down. Just wanted to talk about it. What were you thinking there? You can have a conversation about it and you can work it out, and you're not always going to agree, but you know what I'm saying? The two situations are very different, and their situation has been more towards the first one that I mentioned, where there's this feeling in the building that other people are kind of out to get them, that not everybody is there to help each other, that there are these silos with these different departments. And to me, that is the big issue. And to be fair, this is not an issue just with the Eagles, just in the NFL. I mean, this is throughout sports. There's that battle everywhere. A lot of people see Moneyball, right? It's the analytics and the scouting and the coaches, and you're not always going to see eye to eye. There are all these ideas. How do you get those two sides to work together? Because that's the key, because it's going to help you win more games. And I don't think they've been effective when they talk about being at the forefront of this stuff. They're at the forefront only because they have buy-in from the owner. And I think that's unique to them. However, in the implementation, the integration of it, the relationships, I would beg to differ that they're on the forefront of that stuff.
I want to ask a question and make a statement, then I'm going to let you guys run with it. So the question is, do you think the situation between Chip Kelly and Howie Roseman damaged his ability to be a really great GM? That's a question for all you guys, because I think he's damaged. When you go through something like that, I believe that there's a side of him that's damaged. He doesn't ever want to be put in that position again. And then the statement is, he seeks to control everything, from the coaches that he's hired. I believe that he hired Doug Peterson because he felt he could control him. I believe they hired Nick Sirianni because they feel like they can control him. They don't want a strong personality guy, a guy who's going to tell them what to do and how to do it, a coach with just, a real strong personality. And I think that some of the things that have transpired organizationally are a result of the baggage that Howie now carries from his past. It seems like you've got these factions, and Howie is hitched to the analytics people, and Jeffrey's hitched to the analytics people, and you've got these factions, a house divided according to B Doc. All of these things are happening because deep down, I feel like Howie's afraid to ever lose control again, and he's never going to allow that to happen again. Zach, go.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it's fair in that Howie got cast aside before, right? And he wants to be the general manager of the team, right? Like if you have a job, you probably don't want to create a situation where you won't have a job. Like that's I wouldn't want to be pushed aside. So that part of it, I suppose I can understand, but I think more of the issue is exactly what you just said, Seth. Like that, you can't have that in a building. The very role that Howie is entrusted to have is to bring all of that together. It's not necessarily to do what's in your best interest. It's that you are savvy enough to understand all these different departments and all these different needs and gather all this information and use that to inform decisions, but also to create a culture that is a productive one. So I think that more than anything else. But to answer your question succinctly, yeah, I mean, I would imagine that Howie would want a coach that he could work with as opposed to a coach that would want to knock him off. And if I was in Howie's position, I would probably feel the same way. Like I would want someone who can work with me. And that, by the way, is what Jeffrey Lurie needs to consider when he makes these decisions. Ultimately, Lurie's hiring the coach. And so he needs to figure out if a coach is able to work with his executive, or if a coach can't work. If a coach can't work with his executive, does that say something about the coach, or does it say something about the executive?
Before you go, Shio, I agree that the GM should be able to work with the coach, but I think that you guys talked about in the article Howie being a survivor and him being in survival mode. I just think that it's not a situation any longer where he wants to work with a guy. I think he wants to work with a guy that will acquiesce to his likings and what he wants to do. And in the interview process, he's got Jeffrey's ear. And if he doesn't get the sense that that guy is a guy who's going to do that, then that guy doesn't get a second interview, or he doesn't get considered. That's just, I just want to make that point. Go ahead and go, Shio.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, the GM has controlled the 46-man roster. Think if you're a coach coming in who has a strong resume and a strong background, and you're coming in going, wait, I can't even pick who is going to be active on game days. Now, listen, it's not Howie going in and saying, here are the 46 players who are going to play. He does have conversations with the head coach and they work it out. But still, the bottom line is with all these things, it's a very big ego business, as we all know, and somebody has the final say on stuff, and that person is going to be Howie. Yeah. So when like Josh McDaniels' name was being thrown around for the head coaching job, I think Bo, Zach, and I had conversations on our podcast that wait, Howie's going to bring in a guy like Josh McDaniels to work with, who, if nothing else, is known as a very strong personality, a control freak. I mean, whatever descriptors you want to use there from his previous stop as a head coach, that was just kind of like baffling to me. And who knows, maybe they thought they could work it out, but that never made sense from the outside looking in. And from doing the reporting on this story, asking someone with experience in the NFL, they thought the same thing, that that would have been a huge, that would have just been such a questionable decision for them to make if Howie was in that survival mode. So, yeah, I think it goes for Howie and Jeffrey. They want to run the organization a certain way, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. I think they implement a lot of good ideas, like Zach was saying. If you look at their winning percentage, playoff appearances, whatever, since Jeffrey Lurie became the owner, I mean, they're a top 10 organization. Now, having said that, we laid out in the article, and everyone can see with their own eyes over the last 3 years, that this is not a top 10 organization right now, and there are a lot of flaws. So they want a coach who is going to, be good, but also be good in the ways that allows them to do their jobs and exert their influence and run the organization the way they want to run it. So I think that's 100% accurate. I'm not even sure how anyone could deny that at this point.
And then I would just say on the, on like the general manager front, in terms of the football decisions that he's making, I actually sort of think this Super Bowl is more instructive on, what the decisions that Howie has made incorrectly over the past few years than, his time with Chip Kelly, because obviously we have to give him credit. He did put together that Super Bowl roster. But I think coming off of that Super Bowl, you have 2 ways of moving forward. And one is like, okay, you know what, guys, we got really lucky. Like, it's like it's a blackjack hand, right? We hit on 17, we got a 4. Let's be happy. Let's go back to what brought us here. Keep doing what we did. Or, it's a tale as old as time. There's the disease of more. Everybody thinks that they're the one who was responsible. Everybody wants a little bit more power, a little bit more influence. And I think that's what happened coming off the Super Bowl. Doug Peterson comes off winning the Super Bowl, calling the Philly special, thinking that he's like, he's got a statue out front of the stadium, and he still has to come in every Tuesday and answer questions. And he still doesn't have a ton of sway over the roster. So you can see how that frustration would build for him. And I think that, Howie Roseman had that amazing string of successes on his free agent signings leading into the Super Bowl, and they decided to sort of continue to go all in with what they thought was a Super Bowl caliber roster. They punted on draft picks. They brought in more old guys. It didn't work. And they kept getting a little bit worse and worse, but still sort of eking into the playoffs. And I think they overrated how good they were and never really reset the roster as they should have.
I'm going to agree with your source that, that said, with all the turmoil that was going on, they don't understand how the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Now, listen, this is not to, mitigate or belittle those players, because those players, I played in 2 Super Bowls. I lost one and I won one.
Big flex.
I know how hard it is just to get there. I had to wait to year 12 and year 13 to get to, my 2 Super Bowls. So I don't want to minimize what they accomplished, okay? But the more I look at this, the more I believe that they caught lightning in a bottle. They got lucky,
which is fine. Celebrate it. That's great, right? Yeah. Don't think that you solved the puzzle.
No, but therein lies the problem, Bo, because sometimes with success comes, a little bit of arrogance. You think you've arrived, you
Absolutely.
think you got all the answers and whatnot, and 3 years later, look at where you are. There's lessons to be learned there. But when you really stop and think about it, my goodness, every single thing, all these facets had to fall into place, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you would much rather be a team, like the New England Patriots. They win a Super Bowl, they know what it takes. They keep replicating the same thing over and over and over again, to continue to be competitive and win Super Bowls. I don't think you can ever look at that organization and say, oh, they caught lightning in a bottle and won a Super Bowl. No, we want the Philadelphia Eagles to be like that. We want them to be run, along those lines where they're competitive all the time. They make all the right decisions as far as the draft is concerned. That doesn't put them in a situation where they know that in year 5, our Super Bowl run is over. We got to tear it all down. We got to fire the head coach, who I'm going to get to in a second. Got to fire the head coach because he wants to rebuild. Well, we know that he can't stand another year of going through what he went through. He won't last another year. So we're going to move on and bring in a whole new staff, start it all over with $60 million over the cap, blah, 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 blah. Okay, you created that situation for yourself because you got arrogant. In my opinion, you got arrogant and you got a little bit, you got ahead of yourself. Okay, there are components and there are things that you have to do organizationally to remain competitive. And some of the decisions that they made blew up in their face. You can't keep getting older. Football's a young man's game. You can't keep throwing good money after bad players. You just can't keep doing that and thinking that those, that's not going to bite you in the behind. So I don't know. I mean, organizationally, I just, the more and more I look at this, the more and more I read into it, man, they caught lightning in a bottle. I think they know they caught lightning in a bottle because in the article you talk about that meeting in 2017, where, they talked about where Jeffrey met with Jim Schwartz. Listen, I've always said that Jim Schwartz was the insurance policy if Doug Peterson didn't get it done or if he couldn't get it done. He was the guy that could step in. You could bring in a whole new offensive staff, a guy who had head coaching experience, so on and so forth, and he could be that insurance policy without having to blow it all up all over again. The last thing that they thought, or Jim thought, that Doug Peterson would find a way to get this team in a position where they could win a Super Bowl in his second year. No one saw that coming, So yes, lightning in the bottle. Now let's move on to Doug, in the last couple of minutes here. I'm going to apologize to Doug. I feel so bad because, you guys know that I'm a run proponent. I think that offenses can be more successful when they run the ball. It opens up your playbook and allows you to do just about anything that you want to do. Okay, Tom Brady proved that this year. He wasn't great in the Super Bowl. He didn't need to be. His running backs gave him, 30-something carries for 145 yards and a touchdown or 2, I believe. Okay, so don't tell me that doesn't work. I get it that Jeffrey feels like, that you have to have this high-powered, elite-level offense, but if you can't stop any darn body, what difference does it make? At some point in time, you're going to have off games or off seasons, off years. And that will bite you if you don't build balance within your roster. But when I think about Doug, I mean, everyone's crying about running and, he goes into this meeting and, back to back. And I'm looking forward here in my notes. I forget what year it is.
2019, the Green Bay and the Buffalo game.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you step into a meeting and you won the game. And listen, if you throw the ball 2 times in a game, who cares? Isn't the objective to win the game? San Francisco cost themselves a Super Bowl against Kansas City, in my opinion, because they had a method by which they went through the playoffs, minimized the amount of throws that Jimmy Garoppolo threw. Let's run the ball because we got 3 running backs that can run it down anybody's throat. And they get in the Super Bowl and they turn it over to Jimmy to throw it 40 times and they lose the game because they all of a sudden they changed who they were. Okay? So who cares? The objective is to win as many games as you can throughout the 16, 17 game schedule to put yourself in the best position, for seeding, but he's getting peppered about what the analytics people are saying and, how many times you're not throwing the ball. I just feel so bad for this guy because he took so much nonsense, and now this comes out. And you find out that the guy really couldn't be a coach because he had the analytics coaching, he had the GM coaching him, he had the head coach coaching him. And I think Doug Peterson right now feels a great sense of relief, because now he can get away from this and hopefully get on with someone else as a Super Bowl champion head coach, and really be the coach of that organization. Because I just believe, based upon what I've seen, that he's never been able to do that. How do you go at Doug Peterson about Frank Reich after 2016? 1 year. You want him to get rid of the guy? and then Carson Walsh and Mike Groh. Maybe Mike Groh needed to go, but at the other end of the spectrum, let your coach have his guys.
Yeah.
He knows what he wants to do. But I mean, they micromanage every little bit about it, man. And I just feel so bad for the guy, man. I really do.
Well, so I disagree with part of what you're saying and agree with part of what you're saying. The part I don't think it's a problem if you as a coach are meeting with your boss during the week, reviewing what happened, going over different strategies, going over different ideas. I think the problem is if the head coach doesn't feel empowered, right? If that's with game day decisions, if that's with building a coaching staff, and that's where it goes to relationships and communication, right? If you're the head coach of the team, you need to feel empowered to make decisions, to win games on Sunday, to win games throughout the season. And that's game day. That's how you coach your team. That's how you build your coaching staff. By all means, you should have input from the people around you. It shouldn't be just like the coach closes off to those people, but the coach must feel empowered. So it goes back to what Shields said. It goes back to the relationships.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Like, Jeffrey Lurie may have been asking the question innocuously in his mind, like, why didn't you pass the ball more? But if Doug Peterson took it that way, we wouldn't have heard about it, right? Like, it wouldn't have spread through the office as a thing that he left that meeting thinking, why was I asked about that? We just won the game. I ran the ball because we were in 12 personnel and the Packers were in dime. Of course, I'm going to run the ball. So. Like if it was taken, whether or not it was asked that way by Jeffrey Lurie, it certainly wasn't taken that way.
Listen, we don't know. I mean, just the fact that it's out tells me he felt some kind of way about the question.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, at the end of the day, if it's all about winning, who cares whether you throw it 50 times or whether you run it 50 times? The players don't care. I mean, it goes back to, that last game of the season. There was so much blowback because I believe that the organization wanted to tank that game. Okay.
I would agree.
But the players aren't bred that way. You can't ask players to do that, So and then they come out and they talk about the lack of communication. Oh, we could have communicated a little better with the players. Well, come on. If I'm a head coach,
they started Rudy Ford at cornerback. What are we doing?
Listen, if I'm a head coach, I'm going into my team in week 16 and I'm telling them, hey guys, we're going to throw this game. What kind of respect are they going to have for me? You understand what I'm saying? But it's and Zach, to your point, I will say this. Doug Peterson, after the Super Bowl, had power. He was in a position of power. Okay.
Agreed.
He should have grabbed the power by the cojones at that time and demanded what he wanted at that point in time. And he could have set the bar for the rest of his tenure if
That's
he
fair.
had done that. I mean, I had many conversations with people about this. I'm like, now's the time to strike. Now's the time. You're a Super Bowl coach. Nobody thought that you could do this. Now, grab him by the balls. Okay, and take what you want now. And because he's such a nice, golly good guy, he didn't do that. And, when things started going sideways, they treated him like a baby, quote unquote.
Right. And this is the thing as we kind of push it forward, right, and say, well, is Howie Roseman just going to be with the organization for the next 20 years and the setup's going to stay the same regardless of results? I do think what you said there, Seth, is very key because I think this goes back to maybe how we started the show, and that's that Jeffrey Lurie does want to win. I think he prioritizes that. I don't think he has ulterior motives. I think he wants to have a Super Bowl winning team. Now, if he has a coach, and, I think we would all look at it and say it's unlikely Nick Sirianni would be this type of guy, but let's say he has a coach who he believes this is the next, Bill Belichick, whatever name you want to throw out there, this is just my guy for the next 10 years. That coach is going to have that kind of gravitas, that credibility to be able to say, we saw with Chip Kelly. That's what happened with Chip Kelly in year 2 is that Jeffrey Lurie thought, I don't know if he's a great coach, but this is what he says he wants. There's a chance whether that chance is 5%, 10%, whatever, there's a chance that he's a special coach. And what did he do? He said, all right, Howie, we're pulling you out of football operations. We're giving Chip the control. So that option is going to be there. Now, listen, maybe it'll work with Howie and Nick Sirianni. You know, as much as we're talking about Doug and Howie, they won the Super Bowl. They got to the playoffs 3 times. It's not like this was a complete disaster, even though we all know there's got to be context there and there are issues there. So maybe it'll work out. But when we look forward, I mean, those are the options. Either it works out with Howie and Nick Sirianni, either Jeffrey Lurie finds someone else he really trusts and is comfortable with to replace Howie Roseman, or option number 3 is you find a coach who you say, I'm handing the keys to you. This is your operation, and you're going to be the one to kind of make final decisions.
Talk to me, Bo, before I pose the last question. Talk to me about Doug.
Well, listen, I think you read that article and it maybe comes across like, Doug didn't do anything wrong. And that's obviously not the case. I mean, this offense in 2020 was really ugly, and Doug takes a lot of the blame for that. And sort of the funny thing, as we've talked about it, the 3 of us, is that, if Carson Wentz is just bad last year, like not even terrible, but just like pretty bad, everybody's still there. We don't learn any of this stuff. And, the organization moves forward and tries to rebound from, call it like a 7-9 season last year. But because Carson Wentz himself was so bad, all of this other stuff comes out and everything else that we learn about the backroom dealings in the organization comes to light.
Careful, man. The Wentz apologists will blow your Twitter feed up talking about.
Bo is right. As usual.
So the last question. And a statement. Now that this is out, this will continue to simmer until the Eagles can manage to get themselves back into, a competitive state. Can this be fixed? I mean, if the Eagles have to endure another 2 or 3 years of, what we witnessed last year in the mediocrity, of 2019, the fans will go ballistic, to the point where, Jeffrey Lurie might be in a position where selling the team might have to be an option. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not saying what he should do. I'm not saying what he shouldn't do. Okay. But I spent a lot of time in Philadelphia. I played the majority of my career in Philadelphia. I know what these Philadelphia fans are like. Okay. When they want a coach gone, they won't let it go until his behind is gone. Okay. So with all of this out in the open and everyone talking about it, if the Eagles have another draft like they've had the last 3 years, if they miss on some of these free agents that they sign, if they get, to all these draft picks next year and all of this cap space to rebuild the football team, and they can't get it done in the next 2 years, I think this year is going to be a wash. I think the offense will be better than the defense this year, because if the offensive line can stay healthy with the weapons that they have, if the young guys can come along on the outside, listen, Miles Sanders is a bona fide baller. Dallas Goedert, if he can figure out where the heck he's going half the time, he's a bona fide baller. If Zach Ertz, if they don't move Zach Ertz, then I don't think he has 2 subpar back-to-back years. So and I think offensively, if they run the ball halfway decent, which I'm holding my head right now, knowing what I know, they're going to put Jalen out there and have him throw the damn ball 45 times a game. I think the offense will be okay. But defensively is where, they've got to – it's harder to get your defense where it needs to be than it is the offense. The defense always lags behind. You got a new system coming in, new coaches, some new players are going to step in. So it's going to take some time to get the defense where it really needs to be. But if in 2 years, I give them this year, if by 2022 and 2023 they don't get it together, man, this Philadelphia is going to be, they're going to want Jeffrey's head on the platter.
Well, yeah.
I think he'd give him Howie's head instead, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we know the two quick fixes in the NFL, right? Either you're going to have a brilliant coach who can scheme things up and maximize talent and fill holes because he recognizes everyone's strengths and weaknesses, And the other one is quarterback. You know, if Jalen Hurts makes a big leap and all of a sudden looks like, you know, he can be a legit franchise guy this year, that's going to erase a lot of this stuff. That's going to buy some time. But Seth, I think you make a good point because, you know, the probability is probably that that's not the case. You know, I like some of Jalen Hurts. I want to see more, but the probability is that he's not going to emerge as like a top 10 guy this year. And so then at that point, you go into next offseason, coming off a year, which presumably you don't make the playoffs, you could have 3 first-round picks. You're going to have more cap space. I mean, you know, that is going to be the crossroads of this franchise. I mean, that's a lot of assets and decisions to be made. And so if you make use of those, all of a sudden you could be going into 2022 and then we could be having a conversation this time next year, say, man, they are a team on the rise. Look at these huge moves they made. The next 3 to 5 years, they're going to have a great run. And if they don't, then, I mean, you're right. I mean, huge questions, coach, GM, how the organization is run. I mean, I think Jeffrey loves owning the team. I think he's been a really good owner. I don't think that's going to be a question. Not that it's not going to be talked about among certain segments of the fan base, but I think it would really be a time there where you would look at sort of just blowing a lot of things up with the front office, coaching staff, the way you run the organization, and almost starting from scratch if you're not able to get it right after next offseason.
Hey, listen, Shield, I hope so, man. Contrary to popular belief, I want the Eagles to succeed in every way, shape, fashion, and form. So I hope so. Bo, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Shield sort of hit the nail on the head there. You know, this team right now, like the roster as it is one of the worst in the league. You know, there's no doubt about that. And there's not a lot of young players to be excited about. But that's what the next 2 years are going to be for. You know, you've got 2 or 3 first-round picks next year. You've got the 12 overall pick this year. They need to hit on some of these guys. They need young foundational players. And, you know, as we saw in 2017, just because some of this bad process is going on behind the scenes doesn't necessarily mean that they can't be good on the field. So if some of these players pop, if Nick Sirianni has real juice with the locker room and can scheme stuff up on offense, or if Jonathan Gannon is some stud defensive coordinator, then, you know, they can turn things around. They still play in a terrible division, so there are going to be wins to be had. But I think next year's draft is when we will find out a lot about the future of the Eagles.
Last word, Zach.
Yeah, as far as whether the organization can be fixed, I think it really comes down to whether they're reactive or reflective, right? Like if they're reflective here and they say, why do people think this? Why is this stuff happening? Then this can turn out to be productive for them. If they're reactive and their impulse is to say, why is this stuff getting out there? Or, you know, that's not us. Then it will probably be more of the same, perhaps with different faces. I also think it's important to note that coverage is often a reflection of the moment, right? They are coming off a 4-win season. They fired their coach. They traded their quarterback. This is the state of the organization. As we've seen in the NFL, things can quickly turn, as Sheil mentioned. Ultimately, it's going to come down to the quarterback play. It's going to come down to the quality of the roster. It's going to come down to if they make good decisions here in the draft. I actually think the past month they've made some smart decisions in free agency as far as not being overly aggressive, being opportunistic. But it's certainly not enough to be like a Super Bowl contender. But I think it's ultimately going to come down to how they build this team, how well they play quarterback, how this coaching staff is. But I don't think they're doomed as an organization. I just think it's what do they do going forward? Do they fix what's there, or do they think they have the way and everyone else is wrong?
Well, listen, I will say this. To a certain extent, I disagree with Bo and Zach, and now we made the trio because I disagree with all you guys. I firmly believe that, you know, organizations are great from top to bottom. You know, if they've got internal situations going on, those situations that are internal are going to manifest themselves outwardly. It's almost impossible for them not to. So if they don't rectify what's going on the inside, especially now that it's all out in the open, you know, we've been speculating for the last 3 years of what the heck is going on with the Eagles. You know, and I've got my theory, and Ray's got his theory, and Barrett's got his theory, and Michael's got his theory. You know, we sit there pre and post game, you know, and postulate these theories. Well, now the truth is out there, okay? And if they don't fix it internally, they will not succeed externally. And that's on the field. And that's where it matters the most. I don't think the fans really care if they're like if the organization's on fire inside and they're winning on the outside, the fans are fine. But that's just not how success works. Everybody's got to be on the same page, working together for the same, goal. I think that's where they were in 2017 to a small extent. But if they don't get it right, I don't know what it's going to look like. And as an Eagle fan, that's painful. And it's painful doing pre and post game, when the team loses, because contrary to popular belief, people like to hear me go in, but I'd much rather do a post game show when the Eagles win than when they lose. Hey, listen, guys, I appreciate you. This is fantastic. I only got through about a quarter of your article, so I mean, we could have out another hour and a half, 2 hours easy. I got all kind of notes over here, but I tell my guests every single week that our most valuable commodity is our time, and I thank you guys for spending the last hour and 10 minutes with me on the Seth Joyner Show. I know that my viewers enjoyed it. I'm looking over here, in the chat room. It's been phenomenal. You guys are always welcome back here at the Seth Joyner Show. Thank you for your article. Thank you for your presence today. And, I'll be chatting with you guys down the road.
It was a pleasure.
Seth.
Thanks, Seth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. We didn't even get to talk about you being a more worthy Hall of Fame candidate than Julian Edelman.
I can't talk about that, Bo. You guys can talk about that. I can't.
Next time.
Next time.
Hey, to all you guys out there, I always say, be good to each other and take care of each other, but most importantly, love each other. I'll see you guys back here next week. Peace.
Thank you, Seth.